The wind howled like a beast awakening, sweeping through the open plains of Nevada with a chilling force. Gray clouds clung low to the horizon, swirling with a menace that spelled trouble for anything caught beneath them. The scent of rain was thick, metallic, electric, and urgent. Nature held its breath, and in the center of it all, a lone Mustang horse stood unmoving, his flanks heaving, his legs trembling beneath his sodden frame. He was a striking stallion once, chestnut coat gleaming like fire in the sun, eyes sharp and wild with the untamable spirit of his kind. But now he was barely standing, his body half submerged in the muck of a fast-rising floodplain. The storm had rolled in without warning, unleashing fury with relentless rain and choking winds. The dry basin had transformed into a death trap within hours, and the herd had scattered. He had stayed behind, not out of fear or slowness but because of something deeper. He had been protecting a foal. The foal was gone now. Swept away by the surge when the bank gave out, her tiny cries fading into the roar of the water. He had chased after her until his hooves sank deep into the mud and refused to let go. That's when he fell. Trapped. Hours had passed. His legs were no longer responding. The mud clung to his body like it had grown hungry for him, dragging him slowly into its pit. Rain beat down mercilessly. Every time he lifted his head, the wind slammed it back down. Every instinct begged him to fight, to break free, but exhaustion was winning. And yet, his eyes, those dark, defiant eyes, still burned with resistance. Farther up the ridge, a girl named June squinted through the downpour. Her raincoat was too thin for this kind of storm, her boots soaked through, but she didn't care. She had seen something from her grandfather's porch, a flash of reddish-brown that didn't move like the wind-blown grass. Her family lived on the edge of the valley, ranchers by blood, but June was different. She'd always been drawn to the wild, especially the horses that roamed free in the neighboring lands. It was her quiet obsession, a secret rebellion against the harsh, practical world her grandfather believed in. Her mother used to call it a gift, that strange connection she felt to animals. "You've got your daddy's soul, June," she'd say. "You see things most people don't." But her father was gone, lost in a flood not unlike this one, swallowed by a swollen river when June was only 8. No body, just a hat and a rope tangled in tree roots. Her mother followed him months later, grief eating her from the inside out. Now it was just June and her grandfather, Roy, a man too silent for comfort, too bitter for softness. But today something had called to her. A flicker of motion in the storm, a whisper beneath the thunder. She knew the Mustangs often took shelter up near Slate Ridge, but the storm had turned even those higher grounds into traps. As she climbed, boots sinking in red clay, she spotted him, half submerged in mud, barely alive. "Oh my God," she whispered, heart leaping into her throat. The horse didn't flinch as she approached, which frightened her more than any wild reaction might have. She knew enough about horses to know that stillness like this wasn't peace. It was defeat. And wild horses? They didn't accept defeat. Unless— Hey boy," she said softly, crouching down several feet away, hands raised. Her voice cracked in the rain. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The stallion flicked an ear. That was something. His eyes met hers for a heartbeat. There was fear in them, yes, but more than that, a question. As if he couldn't believe she was real. June inched closer. The mud sucked at her knees, threatening to pull her under as well, but she didn't stop. Her fingers trembled as she reached toward his neck, stroking lightly where his mane met skin. Cold. Too cold. She looked around, nothing but soaked wilderness, her grandfather's house a dot on the distant rise. No phone, no rope, no tools. Just her and the horse. Her breath came in short bursts, and tears she didn't expect stung her eyes. "You're not dying here," she said, voice hardening with determination. "Not like this." For the next hour she did everything she could think of. She tried pushing from behind, his body barely shifted. She dug at the mud with her bare hands, her fingers numb and raw, the rain turning every effort into futility. At one point she screamed, a wordless, helpless cry that disappeared into the storm. But still she stayed. The horse watched her. Not with panic, not with fear. With something else. Recognition. Behind her, a low rumble cracked across the valley, thunder closer now. The water was rising again. Fast. June wiped her face and stood, heart pounding. "I'm going for help," she said. "You stay awake. You fight. Just a little longer, okay?" She didn't expect an answer, but as she turned, a sound stopped her. A breath deep and heavy. The stallion was still trying. Still breathing. That was enough. She sprinted through the downpour, legs burning, lungs screaming for air. Every step was a battle. When she finally reached the ranch, Roy was on the porch, watching the storm like it was a familiar enemy. "Grandpa," she shouted. "I need help." He didn't move at first. Just looked at her, mud-covered, panting, rain dripping from her chin like blood. "It's a horse," she said. "A wild one. He's stuck. He's dying." Roy's face was stone. "And you went out there in this mess for a wild horse?" "He's fighting to live," she said, shaking. "He saved a foal. I think he chose to stay behind." Roy stared at her, eyes narrowing. For a moment she thought he'd turn away. Tell her the world doesn't care about wild horses or foolish girls. But then, without a word, he stepped inside, came back with rope and 2 shovels. "Let's go," he said. The rain hadn't let up when they reached the basin. The water was higher, the mud deeper. June's heart clenched when she saw the stallion, his head now resting on the earth, body barely visible. But his eye opened when he heard them. Still there. Still alive. Roy didn't speak much. He never did. But the way he moved, methodical, deliberate, told June everything. He used the rope like a lever, wrapped it under the horse's body. June dug around the legs, freeing the suction of the mud inch by inch. Took time, too much time. When the horse finally lurched free, it wasn't graceful. He collapsed first, then rolled, his legs flailing weakly before he found the strength to stand. He was trembling, soaked, shivering, but he was upright, breathing. June stepped back, eyes wide with wonder. The stallion looked at her, then at Roy, and then turned toward the ridge. Slowly, limping, he began to walk. June didn't stop the tears this time. "He's going to make it." Roy didn't say anything. But his eyes followed the horse and something in his face shifted, just slightly. A softness maybe. Or memory. Back at the house, they sat in silence as the rain finally slowed. The storm was passing. But in June's chest, a different storm was just beginning. She had seen something out there, something real. Something worth fighting for. And the horse, he had survived. But deep in the valley, another danger was already rising. And neither June nor the Mustang knew just how far fate would push them next. The morning after the storm broke clean and cold, the air sharp with petrichor and the ghost of thunder. June stood at the edge of the pasture, steam rising from her damp clothes as she watched the hills with narrowed eyes. Somewhere out there, the Mustang had vanished into the wild again. She hadn't slept, not really. Her body was sore, her hands raw, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the stallion's eyes, how they lingered on her face like he'd known her all along. Roy was already back to chores. He didn't speak much of the horse after they'd rescued it. Instead, he'd handed June a pair of dry socks and left her to her thoughts. But there had been something different in his posture, less rigid, less closed off. Like some door inside him had creaked open. Not wide but enough. As she trudged toward the barn, June felt a pull in her chest. Not quite pain, not quite urgency. Just a quiet insistence that something hadn't finished with her yet. Inside, the radio crackled faintly with a weather report, but her attention shifted to the old trunk in the corner. It was her father's, locked since his disappearance. She tried opening it once as a kid, got caught, and was grounded for a week. Roy had never explained what was in it. He only ever said, "What's past stays past." But now June wasn't so sure it should. She knelt beside it, fingers brushing the lock, then stopped. Something stirred behind her. A soft exhale. She turned, and there he was. The stallion. Not in the barn, not in the paddock, but just beyond the fence, standing beneath the skeletal branches of the cottonwood tree. His coat was matted with dried mud, a shallow gash above his left flank still raw. But he was standing. He was here. June stepped outside slowly, heart hammering. "You came back," she murmured. The horse didn't approach, but he didn't bolt either. His ears flicked forward, his tail low. He looked unsure. As though the wilderness behind him called, but something stronger held him here. She crossed the yard until they were just a few feet apart. Her hands stayed at her sides. No sudden moves. No expectations. Just presence. "I don't know why you're here," she said. "But I think I need to understand. And maybe you do too." Roy watched from the barn doorway, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt. Didn't move. Just studied the scene like it was unfolding from some chapter of his life he'd long since sealed shut. Later that day, June sat across from him at the kitchen table, 2 mugs of coffee steaming between them. She hadn't meant to ask. The words just slipped out. "Did you know a horse like that? Before?" Roy's face tightened. He didn't look up. "Your dad did." June blinked. "What?" He exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. "Your father was out there more than he was here, especially after your mom died. Always chasing the Mustangs. Said they reminded him of her. Free and fierce. Said he saw one horse more than the rest. Same color. Same eyes. June leaned forward. You think it's the same one? Roy shrugged, but his fingers curled tighter around the cup. Could be. Or maybe that horse just carries the same fire. Either way, it's not coincidence he's here. She sat back, reeling. Her father had spoken of a horse like this. Maybe even this one. Why had no one told her? I thought you didn't believe in signs, she said. I don't, Roy answered. But sometimes signs don't care what you believe. That night, she lay awake in her room, the moon casting pale shapes across the ceiling. Her fingers ached. The gash on the stallion's flank worried her. Infection. Coyotes. Tom. Any one of them could take him if she didn't act. But more than that, she felt a tether forming. Not just to the horse, but to a thread running backward through her father, through her loss, into something larger. She rose quietly dressed and stepped outside. The stallion stood in the same spot beneath the cottonwood, head low. He didn't lift it when she approached. I'm going to help you, she whispered. It took hours, gentle coaxing, and all the patience she had. She brought out a bucket of warm water, a few herbs from the old cabinet, stuff her mother used to use on wounds, and a blanket. The horse flinched when she touched the wound but didn't run. Instead, he breathed deep like some part of him remembered trust. When she finally finished cleaning the wound and draped the blanket across his back, he nuzzled her shoulder, just once, then stepped away. She watched him fade into the night, heart cracked open in quiet awe. The next morning the trunk was unlocked. Not broken, not forced. Just open. Inside were journals. Dozens of them, each filled with her father's looping handwriting. Drawings of horses. Maps of wild trails. And photographs, weathered and curling at the edges. One showed a younger Roy, her father beside him, and a horse in the background. The same chestnut coat. The same eyes. June brought the photo to the porch. He kept everything, she said, holding it out. Roy didn't take it at first. Just stared. He said the horse saved his life once, he murmured. Pulled him out of a ravine. Stayed with him 2 days until I found them. June's eyes widened. That's why he went out after storms. Roy nodded. He thought he owed the horse. Or maybe he just needed to believe there was something out there worth the risk. June looked out toward the cottonwood. The stallion wasn't there this morning. But she wasn't worried. He'd be back. He saved me too, she said. Roy looked at her for a long moment. Then with a quiet grunt he rose. Walked back inside. But not before placing one hand on her shoulder. That afternoon June began cataloging the journals. She made copies of the maps, traced routes, and circled notes where her father had written things like, mating path here, and stallion restless today. She was learning his mind through ink and memory. At the bottom of one stack, she found a final, unopened envelope addressed to her. No stamp. No date. Just her name in her father's bold script. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single page. June, if you're reading this, I probably never got to say goodbye. But I need you to know something. The wild doesn't forget. Not the pain. Not the kindness. And not the ones who listen. I think you have the same gift your mother did. If you find the horse, trust him. He knows things we never will. Let him lead you. Let him show you what I couldn't. And always remember, sometimes the ones who seem lost are just finding the way home. Love, Dad. June folded the letter with trembling hands, tears trailing down her cheeks in silence. That evening the stallion returned. This time, he stepped through the open gate without hesitation and waited for her in the barnyard. He had chosen her. Again. And for the first time in a long, long while, she understood. The past hadn't been echoing. It had been calling. And now, finally, she was ready to answer. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and necessary. June rose with the sun, fed the chickens, swept out the barn, and waited. And without fail, the stallion appeared. Sometimes he stood just beyond the cottonwood, watching her with unreadable eyes. Other times he allowed her to brush his coat, check his wound, whisper soft things she didn't even realize she needed to say. A bond, once tentative, had begun to solidify, not born of control but of recognition. Roy observed it all without comment. He mended a broken fence post, rest-tacked the hay bales, and pretended not to notice when June poured a second bucket of oats. But one morning, as she adjusted the stallion's temporary halter, he finally spoke. You're not just helping him, you know? June glanced over, squinting against the light. What do you mean? That horse carries something. Grief. Memory. Same as you. You think you're healing him, but maybe it's the other way around. She didn't answer. Not because he was wrong, but because the truth of it struck too deep. Later that afternoon, the peace shattered. A rumble of engines echoed down the valley. Dust clouds rose in the distance. June stepped out of the barn and spotted 2 trucks cresting the hill, trailers in tow. Her stomach dropped. "Round up," Roy muttered, stepping beside her. "They're early this year." The Bureau. Every spring they swept the range, gathering Mustangs deemed excessive to the land's capacity. It was always brutal: corrals, helicopters, panic. The stallion stiffened beside her, nostrils flaring. "They're not taking him," she said, voice hard. Roy didn't reply. But the shadow in his eyes deepened. They watched as the trucks parked by the ranger station down the road. Men in uniform stepped out, maps in hand. The next morning, the low thrum of a helicopter began to haunt the sky. June moved the stallion deeper into the forest, along trails her father had marked in his journals. Paths that wove through thickets and across narrow creeks where machines couldn't follow. Each day she led him farther, brushing burrs from his mane, whispering stories to distract herself from the fear. At night Roy kept watch. But the world doesn't grant peace without demand. It happened 3 days later. June had just unsaddled the stallion, though she never rode him, not yet, and was heading back with her kit when the sound of the rotor blades split the air. Too low. Too close. The stallion bolted. "No!" she cried, chasing after him, branches tearing at her arms. He galloped toward the ridge, eyes wild with the instinct of prey. The chopper dipped, hurting him, pressing him toward a rocky outcrop. June ran without thinking, legs burning, lungs raw. She had no plan. Only desperation. A canyon opened ahead, sharp rocks, a steep drop. The stallion skidded to a halt at the edge, hooves scattering loose stone. June caught up, breathless. She stepped between him and the oncoming chopper, arms raised. "Back off," she screamed, the sound ripped from her throat like fire. The helicopter hovered, unsure. Then slowly it pulled away, banking left and disappearing behind the trees. Silence fell like a broken wing. The stallion trembled. June reached out, touched his shoulder, and felt the shudder pass from his body into hers. They stayed there a long time. When they returned to the homestead, Roy was waiting. "They know about him now," he said grimly. "You can't keep hiding him." "Then we fight," she said. He looked at her like he hadn't seen her fully until that moment. Then he nodded just once. That night, June opened another of her father's journals. Toward the back, tucked between 2 pages, was a newspaper clipping, an op-ed from years ago written by her father. A passionate defense of wild Mustangs, their ecological role, their place in the American mythos. He'd tried to fight once too. And he'd failed. But she wouldn't. The next morning she drove to town. Roy didn't stop her. The general store buzzed with rumors of the roundup, some grumbling about overgrazing, others muttering about the noise. June posted a photo of the stallion on the bulletin board beside the old payphone. Beneath it she wrote, "He has a name. He has a story. Don't let them erase it." Then she went to the library and scanned every article she could find on the herd management plans, grazing permits, ecological impact reports. She made copies, drew red lines, scribbled notes. When she returned, the stallion was waiting at the barn. Roy met her at the gate. "You planning to go public?" She nodded. "If they take him, they erase part of Dad. Part of all of this." Roy studied her. Then he handed her an old leather binder. Inside were photographs, notes, and letters, from ranchers, rangers, even tourists, all testifying to the majesty and importance of the wild herd. Things her father had gathered, quietly, over the years. "I think he meant for you to have this," Roy said. "When the time was right." June blinked back tears. "It's right now." That evening she built a website. Uploaded the photo. Shared her father's words. Added a donation link. Then she clicked publish. By morning the page had over 1,000 views. Emails flooded in. Volunteers. Journalists. Former Bureau employees. People who had followed the Mustangs for decades. Some offered legal advice. Others sent footage of roundups gone wrong. The fire had caught. But the Bureau pushed back. A cease and desist letter arrived within the week, citing unauthorized obstruction of a federal wildlife operation. June stood on the porch reading it aloud while Roy smoked silently. "They want us to stand down," she said. Roy exhaled smoke through his nose. "You going to?" June crumpled the letter. "Not a chance." And then the inevitable happened. One morning the stallion didn't come. June searched the ridge, the trails, the riverbed. No hoof prints. No movement. Just silence. She returned at dusk, hollow-eyed. Roy met her with a note in hand. "From a ranger I used to know," he said. "He thinks they caught him. Holding him at the temporary corral north of the canyon." June's heart cracked. "Then we get him back." Roy nodded, jaw clenched. "We don't have much time." They left at dawn, truck bed loaded with supplies, legal documents, and hope. Along the road, more people joined them. Locals. Photographers. A vet who'd read the article. When they arrived at the corral, a crowd had already formed. And there he was. Pacing. Bleeding. The stallion met her eyes. Recognition. Relief. And behind it, something like a plea. June stepped forward, flanked by reporters and cameras. She held up a photo of the stallion with her father from years ago. "This isn't just a horse. He's part of this land. Part of our history. And we're not letting him disappear." The officials argued. But the tide had turned. Public pressure. Legal counsel. The raw power of truth. At sunset, the gate opened. The stallion walked out, stiff but proud. He came to June. Lowered his head. And waited. She placed her hand on his neck. "Let's go home." The wind shifted. The sun dipped low. And as they walked back into the open wild, Roy whispered behind her. "He chose you. Again." The struggle wasn't over. But neither were they. The days that followed his return carried the weight of quiet transformation. The land seemed to breathe differently, as if the stallion's release had unlocked something dormant not only in the valley but in the people who had watched it unfold. Word spread far beyond the canyon. Local papers ran headlines with his image, and national news began to ask, "Why does this one horse matter?" June knew the answer. Because it had never been about just one horse. Each morning she found him waiting near the barn, not tethered, not coerced, just present. His wound, though scabbed, still bore the raw mark of what he had endured. She dressed it gently, her hands confident now, steady with purpose. He trusted her, and in that silent agreement, something deeper had taken root. But the bureau was not finished. 3 days after the release, a new letter arrived, this one far sterner. It referenced fines, litigation, violations of public land protocols. Roy read it aloud, his voice a flat stone skipping across the surface of tension. June stood by the sink, arms crossed, unmoved. "They're losing control," she said, more to herself than to him. "They're doubling down." Roy folded the letter, set it on the table. "They're not used to pushback." June's jaw tightened. "Then let's give them more of it." That afternoon she began organizing a protest, something visible, undeniable. She reached out to those who had supported the website, inviting them to witness what was at stake. Not just one stallion but the very idea of wildness, of coexisting with nature instead of conquering it. Within hours the event had a name, Stand for the Herd. By week's end, dozens gathered at the ridge's overlook. They held signs, "Let them run free, this land is theirs too, justice has 4 hooves." Children painted hoof prints on cardboard, and elderly ranchers who had once cursed the Mustangs now stood with hats in hand, nodding solemnly. The stallion watched from a distance, alert but unafraid. He seemed to understand that this, too, was part of the struggle. The next move, however, came from the bureau. 2 SUVs arrived at dawn. Not the local agents this time, but suits, polished and purposeful. One stepped out, a woman in her 50s with clipped words and efficient eyes. "Miss Harper?" she said, extending a hand. June ignored it. "You're trespassing. I represent the Department of Interior. We're here to discuss a settlement." Roy, stepping from the barn, raised an eyebrow. "What kind of settlement?" The woman smiled, tight and diplomatic. "We recognize the public outcry. We also recognize your father's legacy. We're prepared to designate this area as a temporary non-intervention zone for wild equines, under the condition that all other actions cease. No protests. No more online campaigns." Silence fell like dust on dry leaves. June stepped forward. "So, we go quiet and in exchange you promise not to take him. For now." "It's a gesture," the woman replied. "A compromise." June shook her head. "You think silence is compromise?" The woman frowned. "It's stability." June glanced at the stallion in the distance. "Stability isn't what he needs. Freedom is." With that she turned and walked away. The agents stayed for another hour, trying to sway Roy, asking for reconsideration. But by midday they were gone, their cars leaving tracks in the dirt that the wind quickly erased. That night, rain fell for the first time in weeks. A soft, persistent shower that tapped the roof and soaked the earth. June sat by the window watching the drops streak the glass. The stallion stood beneath the cottonwood, head bowed as if absorbing the rhythm of the sky. She thought of her father, how he used to call the rain a blessing, even when it spoiled a fence post or muddied the path. The land needs reminding, he once said, that nothing stays the same. Not the drought, not the hurt. The next morning, June found an envelope slipped under the barn door. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a photograph of the stallion, taken from a high vantage point, probably a drone, and a single typed line beneath it. You're making enemies you can't see. Roy examined it with a frown. That's a warning. I know, June said, folding it slowly. He hesitated. You scared? Yes, she admitted. But not enough to stop. That evening she gathered a group in the old community hall. Ranchers, artists, park rangers, young environmentalists, all seated in a circle beneath the dim, buzzing lights. June stood at the center, the photo of the stallion pinned behind her. We can't wait for permission to protect what we love, she said. We need to be louder, smarter, and we need to make it permanent. She proposed the creation of a conservancy, a protected zone dedicated to the preservation of the local wild horses. Funded by grants, donations, and sustainable tourism. Managed by those who lived on the land. It was ambitious, risky, but it was a vision they could build together. Hands began to rise. Questions, ideas, offers of help, hope. In the days that followed, things accelerated. Lawyers filed paperwork. A small film crew began documenting the story. The old ranger station was offered as a base of operations. Locals donated fencing, feed, even solar panels. A vet clinic offered support. The stallion remained close but never enclosed, always choosing to return. Then one morning he brought a companion. A mare, skittish and pale-eyed, her ribs still faint beneath a dusty coat. She stood behind him, ears flicking nervously as June stepped out onto the porch. The stallion nudged her forward, gently like a guide. June approached slowly, hand extended. The mare watched her, then took one step closer. And another. Roy appeared beside her. Looks like he's recruiting. June laughed softly. He always was smarter than us. It was that afternoon, as June tended to the mare, that she noticed the limp. Subtle but there. When she checked the hind leg, her heart sank. A gash. Old, infected. She didn't hesitate. She radioed the vet, cleaned the wound, wrapped it. The mare whinnied in pain and the stallion circled protectively, but did not interfere. As she worked, June whispered softly. You're safe now. Both of you. We've got you. It took 3 days, but the swelling receded. The mare began to follow her willingly. The stallion always close behind. The story was no longer about one wild horse. It was a movement now, rooted in legacy, grown through resistance and blooming into something enduring. 1 week later, the conservancy was approved. The news came by email, then by phone call, then by the local paper's bold headline, Wild Haven granted protected status. A map had been redrawn. A future rewritten. That evening, as dusk painted the valley in gold, June stood at the ridge with Roy beside her. Below, the stallion grazed alongside the mare. Others had begun to emerge too, 2 yearlings, a gray colt, a black mare with a crooked ear. They're coming back, Roy said quietly. They never left, June replied. We just finally listened. The stars arrived one by one and the air cooled. Roy handed her a flask. To your father, he said. June took it, raised it. To the wild. They drank in silence. And in the clearing below, the stallion lifted his head. His eyes found hers. Steady. Certain. He didn't need halters or fences. He had freedom. He had home. And this time no one could take it away.